Good morning. This is going to be a quick demonstration just about noticings. So I'm going to pull us in a little bit closer to the board here. Just the key things that I'm going to review. First is that we've spent a few weeks just really enriching your classroom library, getting all kinds of real-world text. And I've encouraged you to go beyond books because although books are a mainstay in a classroom library, getting all of these kinds of authentic real-world texts, things that primary grades teachers often call environmental print, things that are around us in the everyday world. Those are the kinds of things that we really want to work to enrich our classroom library with. So once we've done that, once we've actually done a lot of gathering of these new kinds of texts, whether they be things like I've got here, death certificates, seed packets, food labels, weather reports, Pokemon cards, Guinness Book of World Records, all the different types of text, brochures. So I look at the list that I have posted, the text structures, variety of texts for a variety of purposes. And there's a list of like 85 or 90 different kinds of real world text there that don't fit into the typical genre categories that we often hear used in education. They're just kinds of texts that are out there in the real world, and sure, they're informational, but they're also for very specific purposes that go beyond the idea of spreading information. So moving from there into readings and noticings, I would suggest that early on in the school year that you, like any sort of new routine, do a fair amount of I do, we do, you do sort of instruction on this, where you kind of lead the kids through how to do the type of noticing that's going to help them become writers of this text. And so I would use something like the document camera, your whiteboard, places where you can do a big demonstration where everybody can see what it is that you're noticing, and you can then also do the gradual release of responsibility as you're noticing, inviting them to notice as well. So the big question you would have is that for the type of material you've got, what kinds of, what the type of text you've got, what type of materials are going to help you with your noticings. And I tend to favor using sticky notes because I tend to print out my authentic texts on something like cardstock or put them in these plastic acetate sleeves. But I think a lot of these kinds of Post-it notes could be on hand as well. And you can see how I've marked this up. I'm going to go through that in just a moment. But also I like to have things like index cards at hand, because you can write a lot of your noticings on a single index card and then put that into a folder that goes with your writer's workshop. So even starting out with materials, you're probably going to want to have something like a portfolio for your kids to start storing their study and noticing results, as well as the pieces of writing that they're working on. So that might actually be a binder even for younger kids. So, and again, this is all stuff that we're getting to out of the Study Driven book by Katie Wood-Ray. It's been a great way for us to approach this, because she often gives us that vision of what it looks like and feels like for a teacher doing these things in the classroom. So I'm here today to just add a little bit more visual context to the book. So what you see down here is I've got a collection of about 5 or 6 different death certificates that I've gathered, and I'm going to be looking back at those, but I'm studying this one for noticings a little bit more closely. And I've just gone through and in my first reading, I was just like, what is this kind of text like? And so I took a sticky note and I found out, well, this is where the title is right here. It's not a book, but it definitely has a title. Missouri State Board of Health, Bureau of Vital Statistics, Certificate of Death. That's the title, right? So I've made sure that I see, okay, a title is right here. Then I could come back to my other examples, my mentor text here, and see, okay, it looks like State of Utah Death Certificate, Certificate of Death. This one is from New York. And then I come out to these older ones, and I don't necessarily see a title on some of these older ones. So title is an interesting thing to think about with death notices and death certificates. So also up near the top, I see all of these little things that are like stamps that have been clearly put on there with a stamp. They weren't written by somebody and they weren't printed. So And also, I see little bits of instructions right there in the corner. This one says, if death occurred in a hospital or institution, give its name instead of the street and number. So I guess if more people were dying at home, they had to specify that you need to actually tell the hospital if it's a hospital death. So the next thing that I notice is that if I'm just looking at this as a piece of reading, it doesn't look or feel like a book, does it? And I'm going to talk about that with kids. Does this look like a book? How's this different from a book? And one of the things that kids have noticed with me in the past is it's all made of boxes. And these boxes have numbers on them. So if you look here, the box for sex is box number 3, color or race number 4, number 5 for married, single, widowed, divorced, number 7 is the age, and so on. So this death certificate happens to be numbered 1 through 20. And if I look at my other mentor texts, I'm probably going to see other kinds of boxes. So here's the death certificate I found online for John Lennon. It goes to 21 A and B. So about 20 pieces of information is pretty typical. Let's check another one. Here's one from the state of Utah, and this is a relative of mine. I have a lot of my family history death certificates in my collection because I know some context behind those people. It makes it easier for me to get to narratives and other things that emerge from a piece of text like a death certificate. So in this one, I'm just looking again, just my noticings. Look, this one goes all the way to 23, but I haven't found a death certificate that has like 60 or 70 boxes on it. I haven't found a death certificate that has like 2 or 3 boxes on it. It's like there's a story to be told there in 20 boxes. So that's a noticing. Boxes that are numbered 1 to 20, 1 to 22, 1 to 23, maybe even 1 to 18 or something like that in some places. And what I notice about those boxes quickly is that when I see number 7, age, it's a label, and that label always has an answer with it. So there's the label and there's the answer. Age, 33 years, 9 months, 11 days. So that's the format, is that you have a question that's a label and an answer that is handwritten in. And that's something I'm just going to spend the next one on here is, look, this text has cursive and print in it, and it goes along with this idea of labels versus answers. The labels are printed and the answers are handwritten and in cursive. And that's an older death certificate. If I look at a newer one, I'll see that the answers are typed in with a typewriter. So it's like a form that you fill in. So we could have a discussion about filling out forms, and I could bring in all kinds of different forms as well. And I noticed that that was what some of you put on your list of types of text that you want to invite into your classroom and be gathering, is different types of forms like job applications and so on. They all have similar approaches to handling text, with this idea of a question in the form of a label and a response expected to be filled in. And that's how this kind of thing works. The other thing that I think that a lot of my students would notice is that there are not a lot of sentences here. Different from books, that you don't read a lot of sentences here. It's very much in this question as a label, answer as a filled in form. That's the way it's going to be. Interesting thing about this is that you do see a lot of text like this online, forms to be filled in, passwords and usernames to be entered. And the prompt is usually just like a little one-word thing, and you're expected to know what to put in as the answer to that. And so this is very much like a lot of online reading and writing that kids might see. So that's some noticings. I'm going to just pull out a bunch of these other death certificates now to say that if you actually gave kids a few days to read through death certificates, they'd see a lot of different things. So this is from the 1800s. So I believe this is from 1842. And if I look at the top of this, it's just got a title up here again. It says return of the births, marriages and deaths which have taken place in the town of, and then there's a blank there for the person to enter it in, which means that the state or the county has a specific form for this. And it says for the year ending May 1st, 1842. And I don't know why their recording year ended on May 1st, but that's the way this approach happens. So then there's just an area for instructions up here. And this death certificate, rather than being like what we saw before, is a list of names. So this is several dozen people on this one side of this sheet who have passed away. Then it's a double page spread, so the other side of the same book has other people and their information. So very interesting and different approach to things. One of the interesting things to me about reading this kind is that instead of looking at like box 17 for the, or 18 for the cause of death, down this right-hand column here, you just have this string of causes of death. And I'm just going to read some of those. So disease or cause of death, this is from 1841. Old age, pneumonia, apoplexy, puerperal fever, consumption, cholera infantis, consumption, dysentery, drowned, typhus fever. And this one is always kind of weird to me. This one that says drowned is written in really kind of cramped handwriting, like the person who wrote it was like really sad about writing about the drowning. Typhus fever, pneumonia. This looks like it says paradisis or something like that. I don't know what that is. Old age, apoplexy, consumption, croup. That's one that always gets to me, is that we actually see infants, this is a 5-year-old, it looks like, who is written down as dying of croup. So old age, scrofula, old age, consumption, it's hepatic something or other. I can't read that next piece. Some of the handwriting is tricky to decipher when it's this old. And so it's interesting. So I've got on the next page also just this whole list of different causes of deaths. So when I start reading here, it's like I get this little bit of a story for everybody. So the other thing that they give you in these death certificates is a list of occupations of the people. So I don't get that for everybody, but I've got on this list carpenter, laborer, trader, laborer, gunner in the Navy, carpenter, mason, cordwainer, trader, Morocco dresses, mariner, trader, Morocco dresses. That makes me want to look that up on the internet if a lot of these people were into Morocco dresses, or dresser. I think it says Morocco dresser. Merchant's clerk, ship carpenter, minister of the gospel, caulker and graver, victualler, and another cordwainer. So I actually get to a lot of interesting questions about the past here. So I often will do close readings of death certificates as a way of combining my literacy curriculum with my social studies curriculum, and using primary sources is a great approach in the social studies curriculum. So if each kid has a copy of something that they're going to read closely like this, this is a decent approach to noticings, because this is an annotated piece of text. And give them slightly larger sticky notes and let them write more text on here to explain what they're talking about. Or I might then ask them to take their sticky notes and summarize what it is that they've learned. So here I've got a little bit more text where it says something like labels are like questions with answers and so on. So this is what noticings might look like for me, is to actually go through the text and just think, you know, if I'm doing this as a reader, just going in and experiencing it for the first time, what are the things that I notice about this kind of text? So imagine that you've got kids sitting down and reading a stack of Pokemon cards, and they're picking up a card after a card after a card. What are they going to put on those sticky notes? If you've got restaurant menus or recipes, what are kids going to put on those sticky notes? And one of your key questions can be, how is this different from reading a book? Or how is this different from reading a magazine? Different types of texts that they're familiar with. And getting those noticings out there. And I can't stress enough how important it is to have a lot of different copies of the kinds of texts that you're thinking about, so that they can actually go from piece to piece and figure out what's really consistent in the way these things work. All right, I'll post a new video that's a little bit more about close reading next.